Trump attacks Black Lives Matter for being a Marxist group, while Joe Biden condemns riots. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The election season. The one time of year when people across the political spectrum can all agree on something and yet still fight about it. Who am I kidding? This happens all the time. It reminds me of my favorite Marcus Aurelius quote. The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. I'm really feeling that one. On Monday, presidential candidate and anti-malarkey campaigner Joe Biden spoke at a steel mill in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he condemned the riots that have swept across the United States.
There's no place for violence, no place for looting or destroying property or burning churches or destroying businesses.
Well, that's great. That's exactly how presidential candidate and pro-Trump campaigner Donald Trump feels.
We can never allow mob rule. In the strongest possible terms, the Republican Party condemns the rioting, looting, arson, and violence we have seen.
You know, in a time of national division, it's really great hearing these two opponents bridging the divide and blaming each other for the violence. Yes, both Biden and Trump agree rioting and looting are bad, and it's all the other side's fault, because this is now a major campaign issue. Here's CNN's Don Lemon.
The rioting has to stop. Chris, as you know and I know, it's showing up in the polling. It's showing up in focus groups. It is the only thing right now that is sticking.
Defunding and abolishing the police have been a major issue at these protests. But after mostly peaceful protests started to involve more and more rioting, looting, well, according to a Gallup poll, most Black Americans want to keep the police in their communities. This Marquette Law School poll in the battleground state Wisconsin found that in June, approval of protests was widespread, with 61% approving of the protests and 36% disapproving. Approval declined in August, with 48% approving and 48% disapproving of the protests. And although Black Lives Matter is only one force in the protest movement, support for that group is falling too. The same poll found, in June, 59% were favorable and 27% were unfavorable. In August, favorable views declined to 49% favorable to 37% unfavorable. That was similar to the Civics poll, which found support for BLM peaked at the end of June and has been falling since. And believe it or not, Trump is no fan of Black Lives Matter.
It's a Marxist group that is not looking for good things for our country.
And by criticizing it, Trump has inevitably made BLM more popular. But is Black Lives Matter a Marxist group as Trump accuses it of being? Well, at least one of the groups they got training from was the Labor Community Strategy Center. It's a think tank that says it has roots in the new communist movement. And here's Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors in a 2015 interview.
Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Now, some have argued that just because the founders of BLM are Marxist doesn't make the whole organization Marxist, because many BLM supporters aren't Marxist. And the BLM website doesn't explicitly advocate for Marxist positions, well, except for disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. But Black Lives Matter definitely has ties to Marxism. And since Karl Marx advocated for the violent overthrow of society, that's really not a great look right now, what with all the riots advocating for the violent overthrow of society. so you can understand why support for Black Lives Matter has been declining over the last couple of months. Plus, in a recent protest, a man who described himself as a Black Lives Matter and Antifa supporter allegedly shot and killed a Trump supporter. We did an episode about the history of Antifa. Check it out. Speaking of which, Trump has been very critical of Antifa, and he's been critical of Biden for not condemning Antifa.
The violent rioters share Biden's same talking points, and they share his same agenda for our nation. And even his strange speech today that he made in Pittsburgh, he didn't mention the fact, and he didn't mention the far left. He didn't mention the far left, or for what I saw, I don't believe he mentioned the word Antifa. And those on the left are the problem, and Antifa is the problem. The rioters and Joe Biden have a side. They're both on the side of the radical left, and that is so obvious.
So clearly, these riots are caused by Biden supporting left-wing extremists. Not according to Joe Biden.
Ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really?
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't judge people by how they look. That's just malarkey. But anyway, according to Biden, it's actually Trump who's responsible for the violence.
This president long ago forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it.
And that's because the violence is not caused by left-wing extremists, but right-wing extremists.
But his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is.
I think Biden is referring to Kyle Rittenhouse. He's the 17-year-old charged with killing 2 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There's a lot we don't know about him. Reporters and researchers across the country are digging into Rittenhouse's background, and so far, they've come up with no clear-cut evidence of ties to anti-government militias. Even the footage of the shootings isn't super clear. For instance, the New York Times did an audio analysis and found his gunfire is mixed in with the sound of at least 16 other gunshots that ring out during this time. So obviously, there are a lot of unknowns here. But that's not going to stop me from wildly speculating and giving my own non-expert legal analysis. This is a clear case of... What's that, Shelley? Have we learned nothing from the Covington Catholic students about taking things out of context? Of course we haven't, Shelley. This is election season. There's no time to learn anything. Now actually, Biden's speech in Pittsburgh is not the first time he's condemned the rioting. Shortly after the death of George Floyd, after 5 nights of rioting in various cities around the country, Biden said, protesting such brutality is right and necessary. It's an utterly American response. But burning down communities and needless destruction is not. Violence that endangers lives is not. Violence that guts and shutters businesses that serve the community is not. And if you were wondering, Biden's VP pick, Kamala Harris, has also condemned the violence. On Twitter, who does she think she is? Trump? But despite those comments, there is a public perception that Democrats have failed to condemn the riots, or even that they may be condoning the riots. And that perception could help Trump win. Top Democratic officials pivoted last week to calling for calm and condemning riots, with some growing worried that Trump's law and order messaging and his allegations that Democrats are standing by criminals could hurt the party with some voters in November. Take what's happening in Portland, Oregon. There have been nightly riots there since the death of George Floyd. But the Democratic mayor, Ted Wheeler, has repeatedly said he does not want help from Trump or federal law enforcement. Well, rioters just celebrated Wheeler's birthday by wearing party hats and lighting birthday candles. And by birthday candles, I meant they set stuff on fire and threw it into his apartment building. I wonder if Mayor Wheeler's neighbors are going to vote for him in this year's election. So, where were the police? This is from their official statement. In an attempt to de-escalate, officers stayed out of sight and monitored the situation from a distance. However, the vandalism and burning continued. Really? It did? But Portland police did eventually move in and arrest 19 people during the demonstration. But don't worry about any escalating violence in Portland, Because Mayor Wheeler has the solution, and he's gonna move. I don't mean he's going to take political action. I mean he's going to move out of his apartment. That'll solve the problem. Chicago also faced major rioting and looting. Looters smashed business windows in Chicago's central business district last month after a police shooting. After about 100 people were arrested, Black Lives Matter Chicago held a solidarity rally, with one organizer defending the looting.
I don't care if somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That is reparations. Anything they want to take it, because these businesses have insurance.
Spoken like someone who has never had to deal with an insurance company. The unrest led to Chicago literally cutting off the downtown area so people couldn't get in. So, Black Lives Matter tried to hold a rally in Englewood, the Chicago neighborhood where the shooting took place, until locals forced them to leave.
A lot of people saying that the looting downtown sparked from Englewood. We're not having that. It didn't spark from Englewood. Those are opportunists, and we're tired of Englewood getting a black eye for any and everything that happens.
Smith says he's not buying it, and he and other Englewood residents wanted the protesters from Black Lives Matter Chicago, Good Kids Mad City, and other groups to leave.
Chicago's Democratic Mayor Lori Lightfoot has condemned the looting. She's called it brazen and criminal looting and destruction. She also said, "We do not need federal troops in Chicago." However, Lightfoot does maintain a heavy police presence on the block where she lives, as you can see. When asked if she felt that was maybe a bit hypocritical, she said she, her wife, and child have a right in our home to live in peace, and I make no apologies whatsoever for that. I mean, when has a politician ever apologized for anything? Optics are a big part of elections, and with these protests, the optics for the Democratic Party aren't looking good right now. Here's CNN's Don Lemon again.
And I think this is a blind spot for Democrats. I think Democrats are ignoring this problem or hoping that it will go away.
Ooh, if that's the case, this clip really hasn't aged well.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Wait, I thought the protests were peaceful, according to this CNN report from Kenosha about fiery but mostly peaceful protests. Just like the partly dead but mostly unharmed protesters. It's like a glass half full, half empty kind of thing. Only we're talking about people's lives. And while most Democrats and Republicans agree that the violence needs to stop, the one thing that will never stop is them accusing each other of being responsible for it. Like I said earlier, I'm really feeling this Marcus Aurelius quote right now. What's that, Shelley? There's no evidence that Marcus Aurelius actually said that? You know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to pull a CNN and call that quote incorrect, but mostly accurate. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to America Uncovered, and if you can, we really need your support. For as little as $1 an episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon, you can help us keep making great content. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.